My son texted, "You're not invited to dinner. My wife doesn't want to see you here." But it was I who gave them the house they live in. I said, okay, and canceled 134 payments. The next morning, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Ellen Calloway, and I have lived long enough to know that silence can be the loudest sound in a room. I turned 68 the spring before everything changed. I had a vegetable garden that I tended every morning before the dew dried. A golden retriever named Biscuit, who slept at the foot of my bed, and a checking account I managed with the same quiet discipline I had applied to every corner of my life for 40 years. I was a retired high school English teacher. I graded papers, I grew tomatoes, I paid my bills on time, and I loved my family with the kind of stubborn, unconditional love that I had always believed was its own reward. My late husband, Gerald, passed in 2019. He left me modest savings, the small ranch house where I still live, and the memory of a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. We raised one son together, Daniel James Calloway. He had his father's jawline, and for a long time, I believed he had his father's character too. After Gerald died, I made a decision that I told myself was practical and loving in equal measure. Daniel and his wife, Kristen, had been renting an apartment in Phoenix, struggling to keep up with rising prices, talking constantly about wanting space, wanting stability, wanting a yard for the children they hoped to have one day. So I used $180,000 of my savings, the portion Gerald and I had set aside after selling a second property, and I helped them purchase a house. Not a loan, a gift. I signed the paperwork. I transferred the funds. I sat at the closing table and shook the real estate agent's hand and felt, in that moment, like the luckiest mother alive. The house was a 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet suburb of Phoenix with a covered patio and a backyard with 2 old mesquite trees. It was not a mansion. It was a home, and I gave it to them freely because that is what mothers do, or at least that is what I believed then. For the first year after they moved in, things were pleasant enough. I drove the 4 hours from Tucson twice, maybe 3 times. I brought casseroles and helped Kristen hang curtains. Daniel called most Sundays. There was ease between us, the comfortable ease of people who do not yet know what they are capable of taking from each other. Then Kristen's mother, Pamela, moved to Phoenix. I don't want to be unfair. I have no proof of what Pamela said behind closed doors. I only know what I observed. Within 6 months of her arrival, the Sunday calls grew shorter. My questions about visiting were met with vague answers. "We'll figure something out, Mom. It's just busy right now." "Kristen's not feeling great." I told myself it was normal. Families shift and settle, like houses after the first good rain. But then came the small things. The Christmas I was not invited to explained away as a quiet year. The birthday dinner photograph I saw on Kristen's social media, a full table, Pamela centered and laughing, my son beside her. Taken the same weekend, Daniel had told me they were not doing anything special. I stared at that photograph for a long time. My coffee went cold. Was I being replaced? I told myself I was being dramatic. I started keeping a list. Not because I am a suspicious woman by nature, but because I am an English teacher, and English teachers know the power of writing things down. The list grew slowly. A canceled visit, an unanswered text, a holiday that passed without my name in it. Still, I made excuses. I increased the automatic payments I had been quietly making to help them, the monthly transfer that covered their property taxes, the streaming subscriptions I had added to my account for them, the grocery delivery I had set up after Kristen mentioned she was exhausted, 134 separate recurring charges across credit cards, bank accounts, and subscription services. I had never counted them until the morning after. The morning after started with a Tuesday evening in September. I was sitting in my kitchen, the last of the summer light going orange through the window, Biscuit asleep under the table, when my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. I picked it up, expecting a grocery question or a forwarded meme, the small, ordinary currency of our communication. What I read instead was this: Mom, I need to be straightforward with you. Kristen is not comfortable with you visiting. She doesn't want you in this house. Please don't come for Thanksgiving. You're not invited to dinner. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the table and looked out the window at my garden, where the last of the tomatoes were still hanging on the vine, red and quiet and indifferent. The house he lived in, the house I had given him. Was this really what 40 years of love had purchased? I didn't cry that night. I simply sat there until the room went dark, and I thought about what, exactly, I had built, and how quickly a person could be locked out of it. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark with Biscuit pressed against my side, and I ran through the inventory of my choices. Every transfer, every subscription, every quiet act of financial support I had extended over the preceding 3 years. In the morning, I got up before 5, made coffee, and sat down at my desk with my reading glasses and my laptop. It took me 4 hours. 4 hours to compile the complete list of what I had been providing to Daniel and Kristen's household on a recurring basis. I opened every bank account, every credit card statement, every email confirmation I had ever filed in the folder I labeled, with an optimism that now seemed almost comic: family. When I finished, I had a spreadsheet with 134 line items. The property tax installment payments, 2 per year, routed through an automatic transfer I had set up when they closed on the house. The Netflix subscription, the Hulu subscription, the HBO subscription, the Disney Plus account I had added when Kristen mentioned wanting to watch something with her nieces. The grocery delivery service, $200 a month average, sometimes more. The Amazon Prime membership billed to my card, which they used for household purchases, freely and frequently. The monthly transfer I had labeled in my own account simply as Daniel, $500 each month, initially meant to help them build an emergency fund, continued quietly because no one had ever suggested stopping it. The Spotify family plan, the pest control service I had signed them up for after Daniel mentioned finding scorpions in the garage, the landscaping company that came twice a month, their older daughter's extracurricular activity fees, gymnastics. I had paid a full semester without being asked twice, and on and on. Small payments and large ones. Ordinary kindnesses compounded over 3 years into something that, added up in a single column on a Tuesday morning, became a number that made me set down my coffee cup very carefully. Over 36 months, I had contributed an average of $3,200 per month to their household, on top of the original $180,000 gift that had made the house possible. I was not a wealthy woman. I was a retired teacher living on a pension and Social Security and carefully managed savings. I had given them more than a house. I had given them, quietly and without condition, a way of life. And I had been told I was not welcome at their table. The fear arrived then, real and cold, settling in my chest the way the desert cold settles before sunrise. Sudden, total, inescapable. Not fear of them. Fear of myself. Fear that I had, through gentleness and a refusal to see clearly, built my own trap. Fear that I had confused being needed with being loved. I sat with that fear for a while. I think that is important to acknowledge. I did not leap up and make phone calls. I cried, finally. The quiet, dry crying of someone who is more exhausted than heartbroken. I took Biscuit for a long walk. I ate toast standing at the counter and watched the neighbor's sprinklers run and thought about Gerald, about what he would have said. Gerald, who never wasted $1 or a feeling, who would have looked at my spreadsheet and said quietly, Margaret, a gift given under false pretenses is not a gift. It is a loan that was never repaid. He would have been right. By noon, the fear had not left. But something had moved in behind it, filling the space the way furniture fills an empty room. Methodical, purposeful, solid. I was not going to let this stand. Not because I wanted revenge. I want to be clear about that, even now. I am not a vengeful woman. I am a precise one. And what I wanted, with a precision that surprised even me, was the truth made visible. I wanted the accounting to be complete. I wanted the people who had decided I did not belong at their table to understand, fully and finally, what that table had cost. I opened a new document. At the top, I typed a single line. What do I have the right to do? Then I called my friend Patricia. Patricia Hendricks and I had taught at the same high school for 19 years. She was 71, sharp as a sewing needle, and she had been through a divorce and an estate battle and a neighborhood dispute that had ended with a formal mediation, all of which had given her what I can only describe as a practical fluency in the language of legal possibility. "Tell me everything," she said, before I had even finished explaining. So I did. When I finished, there was a pause on her end, and then she said, "Margaret, the first thing you need to do is call an attorney. Not because you want to sue anyone, because you need to understand what you are actually holding before you decide whether to put it down." She recommended someone, a woman named Carol Reyes, who practiced family and property law in Tucson, and who, according to Patricia, had the rare quality of telling clients what was true rather than what they wanted to hear. I wrote the name down. I did not cancel the payments yet. I did not respond to Daniel's text. I simply sat with my list and my decision and the name on the paper in front of me, and I understood that I was standing at the edge of something I could not uncross once I stepped over it. I thought about that for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and made the appointment. Carol Reyes's office was on the second floor of a low adobe building on the east side of Tucson, with a waiting room that smelled like printer paper and coffee, and the particular quiet of a place where people come with problems they cannot solve alone. I arrived 10 minutes early, which is my nature, and I sat in a chair by the window and watched the traffic below, and tried to organize my thoughts the way I once organized my classroom, clearly without sentiment, in the order that would be most useful. Carol herself was perhaps 50, compact and unhurried, with the kind of face that gives nothing away unnecessarily. She read through the summary I had prepared, 3 pages, itemized, dated, without interrupting me. When she finished, she set it down and looked at me over the rim of her reading glasses. "You understand," she said, "that the house is theirs, legally, outright. You gifted it. There's no mechanism to reclaim a completed gift transfer, absent fraud." "I understand," I said. "But everything else on this list," she continued, tapping the spreadsheet, "is entirely within your control. Every subscription, every payment, every transfer. As long as it originates from your accounts, you can cancel it at will, at any time, without notice." "I know," I said. "I wanted to know if there was anything I should do before I cancel them, legally, anything that protects me." She nodded slowly. "There are a few things. If any of these payments have been represented, in writing or verbally, as a loan, or if you have documentation of any agreement, that changes the picture. Do you have anything like that?" I had brought a folder. Inside it were 3 years of bank statements, every email exchange between myself and Daniel that referenced money, and a series of text messages in which Daniel had, on at least 4 occasions, thanked me for the support in ways that made the amount specific and the gratitude explicit. Carol looked through the folder with the same unhurried attention she had given the spreadsheet. Then she said, "Document everything going forward. Whatever you do, do it in writing. Keep records of every communication. And before you cancel anything, let me draft a formal letter, not threatening, simply factual, that establishes your intent and your reasoning. A paper trail protects you. We met for 90 minutes. When I left, I felt the particular clarifying calm of a person who has stopped guessing and started knowing. I drove home, and I did not cancel the payments yet. Not because I had changed my mind, because Carol had asked me to wait 1 week while she prepared the letter. I agreed. Precision matters more than speed, but something else happened in those 7 days. On Thursday, 2 days after my appointment with Carol, Daniel called me. Not a text, an actual phone call, which had become unusual enough that I noted the time in my records. 7:14 p.m. Hey, Mom. His voice was careful in a way I recognized immediately, the voice of a man who has been briefed. I just wanted to check in. I know my text the other night was kind of abrupt. I hope you're doing okay. I told him I was fine. I kept my voice warm and even, which was not difficult. Because I have spent decades teaching rooms full of teenagers, and I know how to hold my expression, while my mind works independently. Kristen and I have been talking, he said. We just need some space right now. It's not personal. It's not personal. As though the $180,000 and the $3,200 a month were not personal either. I said I understood, and that I hoped they were well. I asked about the children. He told me. We spoke for 11 minutes, and nothing real was said on either side. After I hung up, I sat for a long time and thought about the timing of that call. 2 days after I had visited an attorney's office. Had someone seen me? Had someone mentioned it? Tucson is not a small town, but coincidences in family conflicts rarely are. The proof, the real proof, the kind Carol had asked me to watch for, came on Saturday. Patricia called me. She had been at a garden club meeting the previous afternoon, a thing she attended monthly at a community center near the university. Kristen's mother, Pamela, had been there. Pamela, who had apparently made a new friend in Patricia's garden club without either of them knowing the connection. And Pamela, in the course of what Patricia described as an extended, unprompted monologue, had said, with the easy confidence of someone who believes she is speaking among allies, that she had advised Kristen to get Margaret out of the picture emotionally before she could make any legal trouble, that Daniel was too soft and needed Kristen to manage the situation, and that the goal had always been to get the property settled and move on. Patricia had written it down in her little notebook on the drive home. She read it to me verbatim. I sat very still on my back porch, biscuit at my feet, the desert evening going copper and purple around me. The mesquite in my yard was still. The air was dry and cool. Get Margaret out of the picture before she could make any legal trouble. So this had been deliberate, not a drift, not a thoughtless slight born of busy lives. A strategy. Pamela's strategy, fed to Kristen, executed through Daniel. I called Carol the next morning and told her what Patricia had reported. Carol advised me to have Patricia write a signed statement while the memory was fresh. Patricia agreed without hesitation. On Monday, I received Carol's letter. I read it carefully. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up my spreadsheet, and for the next 2 hours, I canceled every single item on the list. 134 payments. Gone. I did not feel anger when I clicked the final confirmation. I felt the particular functional relief of a problem properly named. What I did not yet know was how quickly they would notice, and what they would do when they did. They noticed within 48 hours. I had expected it would take longer. I had perhaps underestimated how closely their household budget had come to depend on what I had been providing. The grocery delivery didn't arrive on Wednesday. The pest control company called Daniel on Thursday to inform him that the account had been closed. The $500 transfer that was supposed to hit their account on the first of the month did not appear. One by one, like lights going out in a house at the end of a night, the cancellations registered. I was in my garden on Friday morning, cutting back the dead tomato vines, when my phone began to ring. Kristen. I looked at the screen for a moment, then answered. Margaret. Her voice was tight and very controlled, the voice of a woman who has rehearsed. I think there's some kind of problem with your accounts. Several things seem to have been canceled. Yes, I said. I kept my voice pleasant and even. I reviewed my finances last week and decided to make some adjustments. Everything is intentional. A pause. What does that mean? It means I canceled the payments I was making on your behalf, all of them. Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, the control in her voice had cracked slightly at the edges. Margaret, some of those are things we depend on. The tax payments, I understand, I said. You'll want to make arrangements. She hung up. I went back to my garden. The morning was cool and the light was good and Biscuit was chasing something imaginary along the back fence. I allowed myself 10 minutes of simple, uncomplicated peace. It lasted about 3 hours. At noon, a car pulled into my driveway that I recognized as Pamela's white Buick. Behind it was Daniel's truck. I watched from the kitchen window as all three of them, Daniel, Kristen, and Pamela, walked to my front door together. It was not an accidental visit. It had been organized. I opened the door before they could knock. Come in, I said, and stepped aside, because I had nothing to hide and nowhere to retreat to, and because in my experience, people who organize confrontations expect resistance at the door and are always slightly disoriented when they don't find it. They sat in my living room. I offered water. No one took it. Pamela sat in the chair nearest the door, which I noticed. Daniel spoke first. His voice was apologetic in a way that rang slightly hollow, like a bell with something packed inside it. Mom, we're worried about you. The cancellations. Kristen. We think something might be going on. Nothing is going on, I said. I made a financial decision. Then Pamela leaned forward, and the mask of concern slipped completely and efficiently away. Margaret, she said, in a tone that had no warmth in it at all, you should understand that what you're doing could be considered financial manipulation. Withdrawing support suddenly, without discussion. A lawyer could look at that as, I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said. She reviewed everything. I'm happy to give you her contact information. Pamela stopped. The silence in the room was extraordinary. I watched Kristen's face, which had gone very still, and Daniel's, which had gone a color I had not seen on him since he was a boy and had broken something valuable. Then Pamela changed her approach, as I had expected she would. She softened her voice and talked about family, about the grandchildren, about how much Daniel needed me, about how Kristen had been under so much pressure and perhaps had not handled things well. She said that what had been texted was not what was meant. She said they wanted to fix things. She said they had come to make peace. I appreciate that, I said. When Daniel would like to speak with me privately, without an audience, I'm available. Until then, I think we've said what needs to be said. I stood up. I walked to the front door and opened it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Pamela rose, and the others followed, and they walked out of my house in a sequence that told me everything about who was leading whom. I closed the door and stood with my hand on it until I heard the cars leave. Then I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and I shook. Finally. Not from fear, but from the sheer physical effort of holding still while being pressured, the way a tree shakes after a wind passes through. I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring, as she always does. They came, I said. I know, she said. How are you? Intact, I said, and I meant it. For the next 4 days, I did very little. I read. I walked with Biscuit in the mornings. I called Carol once to update her, and she said with quiet approval that I had handled the confrontation correctly. I ate dinner on my back porch and watched the stars come out over the desert, which is one of the great, uncomplicated pleasures of living in southern Arizona. And I did not think about spreadsheets or attorneys or the particular expression on my son's face when I opened my front door to him. I rested. I had earned it. And I knew, with the steadiness of someone who is committed to a direction, that what came next would require everything I had. The call came on a Tuesday, 10 days after I had shown them to my door. Daniel, this time alone. No Kristen in the background. No conference call quality to the silence. Just my son's voice, which I had known for 41 years and which still, underneath everything, carried the faint register of the boy who used to bring me grasshoppers in his cupped palms and present them like gifts. "Mom," he said, "I'd like to come see you. Just me. Can I do that?" I said yes. I meant it. Whatever Pamela had built around my son, he was still my son, and I had not given up on the distinction between Daniel the man and Daniel the person being managed. He came on Saturday. He sat at my kitchen table and I made coffee, the real kind, not the pod machine, because some rituals are worth preserving. He looked tired. He had lost a little weight, which I noticed the way mothers notice things. Cataloging, filing, not commenting. We talked around the edges of it for a while. He asked about my garden. I asked about the children. There was something almost tender in the first 20 minutes, the way tenderness sometimes survives long past the environment that produced it. Then he said carefully, "Mom, we've been struggling since the changes. Kristen is really stressed. The tax payment especially. We weren't prepared for that." "I understand," I said. "I know I handled the text message badly," he said. "I know Kristen and I haven't. I know things got out of hand." He paused. "I guess what I'm asking is whether there's a path back. To the way things were. Between us." The way things were. I looked at my son across my kitchen table and I thought about what that phrase actually meant. The way things were included me paying $3,200 a month to be excluded from their holidays. The way things were included Pamela advising Kristen to remove me from the picture before I could cause legal trouble. The way things were was a construction designed to benefit from me while ensuring I asked nothing in return. "I would love a relationship with you," I said. "A real one, not one where I am welcome in proportion to what I am providing." He looked at the table. "The financial support," I said, keeping my voice gentle but clear, "is not coming back in its old form. That chapter is finished. But if you would like to build something honest, Daniel, I am here for that." He left after another half hour. He did not commit to anything. He did not argue. He simply looked at me at the door with an expression I could not fully read. Something between relief and grief, as though a decision had been made that neither of us had spoken aloud. After he left, I called Patricia and told her what had happened. "You did well," she said. "Did I?" I said. Because in the silence after he drove away, I had felt for the first time the weight of what I was asking of myself. To hold the line against the man I had raised, against my own longing to simply have my family back. "You did," she said firmly. "Come to dinner Saturday. Bring biscuit. I'll make the soup you like." I said yes. Patricia's house was warm and smelled like onions and rosemary, and her husband Frank poured me a glass of wine without asking whether I wanted one, which is the most companionable gesture I know. We ate around a table that was slightly too small for the number of chairs crowded around it and talked about things that had nothing to do with Daniel or Kristen or Pamela. And I remembered, sitting there, that there is a category of love that does not require you to earn your place at the table. My neighbor, Jim Kowalski, had noticed the 3 cars in my driveway the week before and had knocked on my door the following morning under the pretext of returning a garden tool he had borrowed in August. He was 73, a retired contractor, widowed, with the unhurried watchfulness of a man who has seen enough of life to know when someone needs a witness. "Everything all right?" he had asked. I had told him a version of it. He had listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. If you need anything, he said, I am 20 feet away. I had thanked him and meant it, from a distance. And I knew they were watching, because the sudden absence of noise from someone who has been providing financial support is as loud as any action. Daniel and Kristen had gone quiet. Pamela, according to Patricia's ongoing, and I admit, welcome intelligence from the garden club, was furious and planning something, though the specifics remained unclear. I let them watch. I went to Patricia's for dinner. I walked with Jim in the evenings. I continued my meetings with Carol, whose letter had been sent and acknowledged. I tended my garden, which did not require anything from me beyond attention and care, and showed up consistently in return. I was not hiding. I was simply living. And I had a feeling, the kind that sits in the back of the throat and does not quite go away, that Pamela was not done. I was right. They came on a Wednesday afternoon without calling ahead, which told me everything about the intention before either of them had opened her mouth. I was in the backyard deadheading the marigolds when I heard the gate latch. I turned, and there they were. Kristen in a pale blouse, carrying what appeared to be a bakery box, and Pamela behind her. Dressed as though attending a church function she found only mildly beneath her. They had chosen their wardrobe as carefully as their approach. Margaret, Kristen said, smiling with her mouth. I hope this is okay. We brought pastries. Of course, I said. I set down my clippers. Come in. I led them through the back door and into the kitchen. I put on the kettle. The bakery box was placed on my table and opened to reveal croissants, which under other circumstances I would have enjoyed. We sat down. Kristen arranged herself with the careful self-consciousness of someone who has planned this scene. We wanted to come alone, Kristen began. Without Daniel, just us. Woman to woman. Pamela nodded, her hands folded in her lap. Margaret, Kristen said, and her voice shifted into something rehearsed and soft. I know things have been very hard, and I know I hurt you with the way Daniel communicated. That wasn't fair. You deserve better than that. I waited. You are family, she continued. The children ask about you. Emma asked last week why Grandma Margaret hasn't come to visit. She paused at the name, letting it sit there like a piece of furniture placed deliberately in a doorway. That broke my heart. It really did. I would love to see Emma, I said, which was true. Then let's fix this, Kristen said, leaning slightly forward, and here the softness in her voice shifted, barely perceptibly, into something with an understructure of pressure. We can go back to the way things were. All of it. We'll set a date for Thanksgiving. I'll call you every week. The kids need their grandmother. You need your family. That's what matters, isn't it? Not all of this. Not the financial stuff. Not the financial stuff. As though $180,000 and 3 years of monthly payments were a minor administrative matter that had gotten slightly out of hand. I agree that the children matter, I said. Pamela spoke then, for the first time, and her voice had none of Kristen's practiced softness. Margaret, you have to understand that what you're doing, the lawyer, the canceled payments, all of it, it's tearing this family apart. Daniel is a wreck. The children are confused. At some point, you have to ask yourself whether being right is worth losing everything. I looked at her. She held my gaze with the confidence of a woman who has won these conversations before. I haven't lost anything, I said. I've gained clarity. Kristen's smile faded by exactly 1 degree. We're asking you to be the bigger person here, Margaret. For the children, for Daniel. You've made your point. But this is real life, not a... Kristen, I said quietly. You came here today with pastries and a speech about the grandchildren because you need me to restore the payments. I understand that. I am not confused about what this visit is. I looked at them both. I love Emma. I love all of them. That will not change. But I will see them as their grandmother, not as a financial service. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something final has been said. Kristen's face went through several expressions quickly, the way faces do when a rehearsed scenario has reached a line the script didn't include. Pamela's face settled into something harder and colder than what she had arrived with. "You'll regret this," Pamela said. It was not said loudly. It was said with the flat certainty of a woman who intends to make it true. "Perhaps," I said, "but not today." I walked them to the door. The bakery box remained on my table. They did not take it. I stood at the window and watched Pamela's white Buick reverse out of my driveway with a speed that expressed what she had chosen not to say. Then I turned and looked at my kitchen and my table and the box of croissants and biscuit asleep in the corner, and I felt it. Fear. Real and cold and specific. "You'll regret this" from a woman like Pamela was not an empty phrase, but here's what I have learned, and what I knew even then, standing in my kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon. Fear that comes from doing the right thing is a different animal than the fear that comes from doing nothing. The first kind is frightening, yes, but it has a floor. You can stand on it. And once I understood that, the fear became something else. Something that straightened my back and steadied my hands. I called Carol the next morning and told her about the visit. "Document it," she said. "Time, attendees, what was said, as much as you can remember." I wrote 4 pages. I had been an English teacher. I remember dialogue. And then I waited, because I understood now that Pamela would not accept a quiet withdrawal. She would escalate. It was in her nature, and I needed to be ready for it. The climax arrived, dressed as a phone call from Daniel on a Thursday evening, 5 weeks after the visit from Kristen and Pamela. "Mom," he said, "I think we need to talk, all of us. Can you come to Phoenix?" I said yes. I had been expecting it. Carol had been expecting it too, and we had prepared. I drove to Phoenix on a Saturday morning, which is a drive I have made enough times to know its rhythms. The long, flat stretch of I-10, the way the landscape opens up past Picacho Peak, the ring of mountains around the city that never seems to get closer until suddenly you are inside it. I had made this drive to bring casseroles and help hang curtains. Now I made it with a folder on the passenger seat and Carol's voice in my memory reminding me, let them speak first. Let them commit to their version. Then present what you have. Daniel and Kristen's house, my house, in the way that a thing you have paid for is yours even when it legally isn't, looked the same as always. The mesquite trees in the yard, the covered patio. I rang the doorbell rather than walking in, which I had always done before, because the gesture felt appropriate. We sat in the living room. Kristen had arranged the furniture slightly, I noticed, so that the single armchair faced the sofa where Daniel and Kristen sat together. Pamela was already there, settled in a chair to the side, which she had apparently invited herself to occupy. The dynamic was visible in the room's geography. Daniel began, and I will give him this. He tried to be honest. He said he had been thinking. He said he knew things had gone wrong. He said he wanted to understand what had happened and find a way forward. His voice was effortful and sincere, in the way of a man who has been carrying weight he did not choose and does not know how to set down. Then Kristen spoke, and the register shifted back to the managed, pressurized warmth I had learned to read precisely. She talked about family. She talked about the children. She said again that she was willing to move forward, to put the past behind them. And then she said, with the careful casualness of someone who has been coached, that perhaps some of the financial arrangements could be revisited in a more formal, structured way. Now that everything was out in the open, I looked at her, I looked at Daniel. I looked at Pamela, who was watching me with the sharp, measuring stillness of someone waiting for the moment to intervene. I opened my folder. "I'd like to share something," I said. "And I'd like everyone to hear it, so there are no questions later about what was said." I had printed 3 things. The first was the signed statement from Patricia, recording Pamela's remarks at the Garden Club meeting. The language about getting me out of the picture before I could make any legal trouble. About Daniel being too soft. About the goal of getting the property settled and moving on. The second was the timeline Carol had prepared. Every payment, every communication, the formal letter establishing my intent, the documentation of the Wednesday visit from Kristen and Pamela. The third was a single page, which Carol had helped me draft, that I had entitled simply, "A Summary of What Has Occurred." I handed a copy to each of them and let them read. Pamela got to the Garden Club statement first. I watched her face, which went from vigilance to something I had not seen on it before. The brief, unguarded look of a person who has been caught. It lasted, perhaps, 3 seconds. Then her expression rearranged into controlled anger. "That is hearsay," she said. "Patricia Hendricks does not like me, which is well documented." "Patricia signed a sworn statement," I said. "She included the date, the location, and the names of 2 other people who were present." I had not known, when I reported this, whether it would hold up in a formal legal proceeding. Carol had told me clearly that it might not, but it did not need to. It needed only to hold up in this room. Kristen had turned a color I did not have a name for. She looked at Daniel. Daniel was looking at the paper in his hands, with an expression I recognized as the expression of a man reading something he had, on some level, already known. "Daniel," I said, and I made my voice as gentle as I could manage. "I did not come here to punish you. I came here because you are my son, and because I believe you are a decent person who allowed himself to be managed into a situation that you would not have chosen, clearly. You can see now what that situation was." Pamela stood up. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she said, and her voice had lost the church function smoothness entirely. "You come into this house that your son and daughter-in-law have built." "I built it," I said quietly. "Or rather, I paid for it. That is one of the facts in the document in front of you. You are trying to control your son with money. You have always done that." "Pamela," Daniel's voice flat and exhausted. "Stop." She stopped. The silence was not the silence of an argument paused. It was the silence of something ending. Daniel set the paper down on the coffee table. He looked at Kristen. He looked at his mother, which is to say, he looked at me, and in his face was the particular painful clarity of someone who has been relieved of a story he was not sure he had ever fully believed. "How much?" he said. "Total. Everything." I told him. He closed his eyes for a long moment. What followed was not dramatic in the way of movies, where voices rise and doors slam, and the resolution arrives in a single, clean confrontation. Life is tidier and messier than that simultaneously. What followed was a series of conversations, decisions, and consequences that unfolded over the next several weeks with the quiet, irresistible logic of things that have been too long delayed. Daniel called me the morning after the meeting. He had not slept, which I could hear in his voice. He said he wanted to talk, just the 2 of us, and I said yes, and we talked for 2 hours on the phone. The longest genuine conversation we had had in 3 years. He did not make excuses for himself, which I respected. He said that he had let Kristen and Pamela fill a space, that he had abdicated, that he had been afraid of conflict in his own home and had resolved that fear by pretending there was nothing to see. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, and he said it with the directness of a man who has decided to stop managing his words and start meaning them. I listened. I did not absolve him immediately because absolution without accountability is not kindness. It is permission. But I told him that I believed he was telling the truth. That was enough for then. The formal consequences came through Carol's office. There had been no fraud. Carol had established that clearly, and I had never claimed otherwise. The house remained Daniel and Kristen's legally, as I had always understood it would. What Carol's documentation had established, beyond dispute, was the full scope of my financial contribution and the deliberate nature of the actions taken to exclude me while retaining that contribution. Whether or not a court would have acted on that, and Carol believed it was unlikely to reach a court. The documentation existed, was formal, and was thorough. It changed the negotiating landscape entirely. Kristen agreed, through Carol, to a written agreement. The terms were not financial. I had never asked for money back, and I did not start then. The terms were behavioral. I would have scheduled reliable, consistent access to the grandchildren. I would be notified of family events in advance. I would be treated as a family member, not a financial instrument. Violations of the agreement would be documented and addressed formally. Was it everything I had lost? No. Some things cannot be returned. 3 years of Christmases. A relationship with my son that had been allowed to hollow out. The comfortable certainty I had once had that the people I loved were who I believed them to be. Those things were simply gone, and I had learned, somewhere in the long quiet months of that year, to hold that loss without letting it become the whole of the story. Pamela presented the most interesting outcome. She did not, as I had half expected, disappear quietly. She attempted to insert herself into the negotiations, sending a series of messages through Kristen that Carol dismissed with a single response, citing the signed statement. She called Patricia to dispute the account of what had been said at the garden club, a call Patricia recorded on her phone, in the way of a woman who has been in legal disputes before and knows what is useful. The recorded call, in which Pamela's denial of her own words became increasingly incoherent, was added to the documentation file. Within a month, Kristen asked Pamela to reduce her involvement. I do not know exactly what was said between them, but I know the outcome. Pamela moved back to her own city before the year was out, and her presence in Daniel and Kristen's household became, according to the children, increasingly limited. I drove to Phoenix for Thanksgiving. I will not pretend it was uncomplicated. There was an awkwardness at the table that had not been there before, the slight stiffness of people navigating a relationship that has been acknowledged for what it is. Kristen was cordial, rather than warm. Daniel was attentive in a way that suggested effort, which I respected more than easy charm. Emma, my granddaughter, climbed into my lap after dinner and showed me a drawing she had made at school, and told me very seriously that the purple figure in the corner was Grandma Margaret. I looked at that drawing for a long time. I did not restore the payments. Not the original amounts, not in the original form. That life was over. But I was at the table. I was real in my granddaughter's world. And I had gotten there by being, for perhaps the first time in our relationship, completely honest about what I was owed and completely clear about what I was willing to give. That is not a small thing. What Pamela had tried to prevent, my presence, my voice, my standing in my own family, she had, in her determination to eliminate me, made permanent. Every conversation, every document, every choice I had made under pressure had been recorded and witnessed. I was not the invisible benefactor anymore. I was a matter of record. A person who has been seen, truly seen, is not so easily erased again. The spring after the Thanksgiving that changed things, I replanted my entire vegetable garden. I had grown tomatoes in the same beds for 11 years, and that spring I decided I wanted something different. Peppers, squash, a long row of sunflowers along the south fence that I had always thought about and never gotten around to. Jim from next door helped me dig the beds out one Saturday morning, and we worked in companionable near silence with the radio going faintly from his garage. And afterward, he brought iced tea from his kitchen, and we sat on my back steps and talked about nothing consequential for an hour. I was happy. Not the anxious, effortful happiness of someone who has arranged her life around other people's approval, but the quieter, more durable happiness of someone who has decided what she actually wants and organized her days accordingly. I still taught, in a way. I had begun volunteering twice a week at the Adult Literacy Center on the east side of Tucson. Working with adults learning to read, many of them in their 40s and 50s and older, people who had spent decades compensating for a gap they had never been able to close. The work was slow and specific, and often moving in ways I had not anticipated. One of my students, a woman named Rosa, who was 54 and learning to read well enough to help her grandchildren with their homework, brought me tamales at Christmas and cried a little when she did. I kept the card she made me on the shelf in my kitchen. Patricia and I walked together on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, a habit we had begun during the difficult months and continued because it turned out to be one of the better habits either of us had ever formed. We talked about everything: books, politics, our gardens, the particular satisfactions and frustrations of being women of a certain age in a world that had not been especially designed with us in mind. These conversations were a form of pleasure that I had not known how much I needed until I had them. Carol sent me a holiday card that December and wrote inside it, in her precise, unhurried hand, "You handled everything with great dignity." It was a privilege. I kept that card too. Biscuit turned 11 that year and slowed down considerably, but he was still there, still warm at the foot of my bed, still willing to follow me from room to room on the chance that I might do something interesting. As for Daniel, Kristen, and Pamela, Daniel and I had built, slowly and without the convenience of pretending the previous years had not happened, something that resembled an honest relationship. It was different from what it had been, smaller in some ways, more load-bearing in others. He called me most Sundays. He had started therapy, which he mentioned once without elaborating and which I did not press him on, though I was glad. The distance between us was not gone, but it was acknowledged, and acknowledged distance is navigable in a way that hidden distance is not. Kristen remained cordial and effortful. I do not think we would have chosen each other in any context other than the one we had been placed in, but she honored the agreement, which mattered more to me than warmth. Emma and her younger brother visited me in Tucson twice that year. I took them to the botanical garden and let them eat more ice cream than was strictly reasonable, and I showed Emma how to plant seeds in small pots, and she carried them home very carefully in her lap in the back seat. Pamela returned to her own city in the fall. I heard, through Patricia, who heard through the Garden Club network with the reliability of a well-maintained telegraph, that Pamela's relationship with Kristen had deteriorated significantly after the events of the previous year. Kristen had apparently told her own mother, in terms that left little room for misinterpretation, that the strategy she had recommended had cost them more than it had gained. Their relationship at last report was formal and infrequent. Pamela, by all accounts, was not a woman who accepted this kind of outcome gracefully, which was, I thought, largely its own punishment. I thought about what I had set in motion sometimes in the evenings on my back porch, with the desert going dark around me and the coyotes starting up somewhere past the fence line. I thought about the woman who had sat in this same spot 18 months earlier with a phone face down on the table and a feeling in her chest like cold water. I thought about the spreadsheet and the attorney's office and the moment I had stood at my door and let 3 people walk out of my house. I thought about the sunflowers, which had grown taller than I expected and were visible from the kitchen window every morning when I made coffee. I had not set out to win. I had set out to be seen, and I had been, finally, completely, and on my own terms. That is, I have come to believe, enough. That is, in fact, everything. I have told you this story not because the ending is perfect. It isn't. But because I want you to hear what I learned inside it. Generosity given in fear is not generosity. It is a negotiation with yourself that the other person never agreed to. When you give from strength with clear eyes, you can hold what you give with open hands. When you give from the need to be needed, you build a cage for yourself and call it love. I was 68 years old before I understood that being a good mother, a good woman, a good person, does not require you to become invisible in the process. What would you have done? Would you have kept the payments going? Would you have kept the silence? I used to think I would have. Then I sat in the dark with my spreadsheet, and I realized silence is only peaceful when both people have agreed to it. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. It meant something to me to tell it.